Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Chris Wyatt Africa on the Windhoek Africa channel. Hey, glad to have you here for this special feature today, the first in a series for my segment known as Rugby Ascended. And today we've got a fantastic guest on tap, a friend of mine who some of you in South Africa may know of. He's originally from South Africa, came to the States, played for the USA Sevens, later became a commentator for World Rugby, covering the HSBC Sevens Series, and most recently the Rugby World Cup in Japan, as well as Major League Rugby here in the US. He's been all over the map, all over the world. Quite a fascinating guy. We're going to talk a little bit about growing up in South Africa and then coming to the States and his experiences. Also talk about some of the activities he's been involved in promoting the sport of rugby. That should be interesting. So welcome, whether you find yourself in the United Kingdom, the Republic of Ireland, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Botswana, Namibia, Angola. I don't think anybody in Angola ever comes in, but Ghana, Nigeria, Canada, folks in Canada as well. He's also the host of a new podcast called the Rugby Hive, and we'll talk a little bit about that most likely in the next hour or so. So welcome in, folks. Dumela Botswana, Sawubona South Africa, Otsihilijang. Folks, without further ado, I'd like to welcome my guest in, Dallen Stanford. Dallen, could you turn on your camera and join us in the conversation?
Hello, my friend. Chris, thanks so much for having me.
There you are. Hey, you got the rugby corner up there. That's one you've had around for a long time. Oops, so we already
Yes, exactly. Rugby Corner founded back in 2000 in South Africa, wearing my Cape Town hat as well. So I thought I'd give a shout out to my fellow countrymen and women outside as well to see how they're doing during this crazy time, you know?
The Mother City.
Oh, one of the most beautiful places in the world, Chris. Honestly, a lot of people say, what is your best place to visit? And Greece is amazing. And obviously, you know, countries like New Zealand are just so nice to visit. But Cape Town, you really can't beat it in the summer. And that's why it's so cool to have the Cape Town Sevens there now.
Yeah, no, it is amazing. I've been to Cape Town many times. I think I might have shared this with you. The one frustration for me is that of the 20 or so times I've been to Cape Town, over about 2 decades plus, every time I tried to go up on Table Mountain, the cable car was broken down for maintenance. Until finally, the last time I was there, it was open. And people were always like, why don't you hike up? Listen, I'm traveling. I'm there on business. I don't have a whole day to be hiking up that mountain. So I finally got up there the last time, and my biggest memory of it, other than the stunning beauty, it's a whole microclimate up there, too. It's very different. But my memory was that the security guard saying, hey, sir, be careful. Don't walk over there. There's a lot of robbers up here. I'll be okay.
Well, I will say, if you have more time next time, the hike is stunning and beautiful. You obviously have to have somebody that knows the region, because you can get cloud mist coming over as well. It can be very dangerous, but again, beautiful views, and not just Table Mountain. There's Lion's Head. There's a bunch of other cool mountains you can climb. And actually, my wife, I'm not really a person that would do a lot of heights activities like that, but we did one of those paragliding kind of things off the side of the mountain, and we landed now right near the water where Lamed is, where there's was Lamed, it's now called the bungalow or something, but pretty stunning to be above the water and above the mountains as well.
No, it is amazing. So really quickly, I'll from time to time I'll be referring to the chat there, Dallen, because people have comments and questions, but if I notice something too, and I see someone with the handle Springbok Sevens TV, I don't know is that someone you know, or is that somebody just got a clever handle there? I don't know.
I don't know. It's a great handle as well. Well, Blitzbox, as they're now known,
Yep.
But if there are any questions, fire away. Happy to answer,
Excellent. Well, let's go ahead and get started right into it. So, so the people know. I mean, how do Dallen and I know each other? Well, what happened was, for those who know me, so today let me just stand up so people can see it. I'm wearing, in honor of Dallen and this USA Sevens, I'm wearing a Sevens jersey. There you go, USA Sevens. Yeah. So for those who know, I'm a massive rugby fan, have been for, I'm 4 decades or something like that, which was tough in the States. There wasn't much rugby around back in those days except for clubs. Certainly none in Appalachia where I grew up at. But anyway, so what was happening is I was very active on LinkedIn. I was writing a lot of posts about World Rugby and about trying to grow the game and get the Eagles and countries in the Western Hemisphere more involved. And I saw Dallen on there, and I heard the name. I went and did a little research on him. I'm like, okay, this guy used to play for the Eagles. That's where I recognize the name. And he's a broadcaster. Well, I'm trying to expand my links in the rugby world. Let me see if I can connect with him. So I sent him a link, and I'll let him tell his side of the story. But from what I understand is that he's like, what the heck? This Army colonel writing to me? What is this all about? And I'll let Dallen share from that side.
Well, Chris, I'll tell you what, the good thing about the rugby community is it's very small. It's a tight-knit group. And, and hopefully everybody in it is open to anything to help people if they need to. But your message came out of the blue, and I was like, normally there are people you have in common or friends or that sort of stuff. And I was looking at your profile, and I was like, this is interesting. I was like, how are you interested in rugby with your background and stuff like that? Now, is this for real? But I think it's great because we got a chance to meet at the Las Vegas Sevens. It was really cool to finally meet you face to face after interacting on the old LinkedIn and social medias. And then, of course, you'll probably tell that a bit later, but we get a chance to meet up then at the Rugby World Cup in Japan.
We did. It was absolutely brilliant. And we'll let the secret out now because some people already know it. But not only did we meet at the World Cup, but you made me a promise, and you fulfilled that promise. But let's be fair. We both had challenges. We crossed paths and wound up in the wrong place at the wrong time, or you couldn't get to me and I couldn't get to you. And what the promise was, folks, is that when Dallen found out that he was paired up with Joel Stransky, he told me about it. I'm like, no way. He's like, listen, if you want, I can introduce you. I'm like, are you serious? Of course I want to meet Joel Stransky. Come on, man. Come on, man. Anyway, so Dallen said, I'll link you up with it. And I was there for a month. I think Dallen was there about the same amount of time. You were covering the pool stage, and I looked at my schedule of 18 games and your games that you were broadcasting. I think you had 10 games you broadcast or something like that. And I looked, and we had a link up of 4 occasions. And son of a gun, 3 occasions fell by the wayside, but the last occasion, which was in Kobe. Now, the only problem with Kobe was that, now just a second, I hear some feedback on my end. Is your mic up there, Dallen, or is that me?
There must be you. Mine seems to be fine on this side, I think.
Okay, so really bad. They're telling me my mic is really bad. That's odd. Let me put on mute here.
I can hear you clear, crystal. Right.
Problem. Okay, there we go. All right, now they can hear me again. All right, jeez, this is really frustrating. Sorry about that, guys. So Erica is from the, let me just distract for a second because she came in the chat. Erica is from the Belgian Congo. She grew up in Katanga and knew Moises Chombe, the secessionist leader, and played with his daughter and got out on the last train possible to get out of the country. Erica just came in, she goes, she's speechless. I think because Dallen is on the channel. So anyway.
I think it could be your beard. I mean, it is impressive. You've grown it for a few weeks now, looking strong.
Speaking of beards, look what you've got one there now too. What's going on with that?
Yeah, it's been 6 weeks in the making, and we moved. My wife and I moved from California. We've been there for about 15 years. Moved to the East Coast. Her family lives here, and it's just. I think during this time, it's good to be with family and also to get out of a big city. So we've gone from estimated population of 15 million people to 15,000. So we're in a small little town here, an hour south of Boston. Beautiful. I'm doing fires and braais in the back garden, going to the beach. Going for runs in the forest. It's really a great vibe.
That's awesome.
But Chris, I wanted to go back to that story at the World Cup though, because it gets better actually. So basically, Chris messages me and says, "Okay, cool. I want to meet Joel Stransky after one of the games," and I forget whatever game it was. So there I am at the stadium waiting. Joel's waiting, and the people are filtering out. And you're like, "I'm in the far left-hand corner. These flags are waving," and I'm looking at you, and I'm like, "I really don't see you, Chris." And I'm on the phone with you, and you're like, "No, I'm here. I'm obviously here." I'm like, I know you're here, but there's no one on that side of the stadium. Maybe you got the wrong side." So I go to the other side of the stadium. We come to find out he was at the wrong game. Or I was at the wrong game, whoever.
I think I've just figured out what the audio is here. No, it's not that. Okay, here we go. Sorry, my mic is being all set. That might help it there. I've just done it. Okay. All right. Whoa, now I can hear that louder. Can folks hear me better now? Sorry about that, guys. Wow. Technical difficulties there. Yeah, no, that was hilarious. Well, it was hilarious at the time. Actually, I think we laughed at the moment, but I was like, I can't believe it, because it was like, I don't know if it was the first time we were trying to link up or the second time, but it was really, really something odd. But yeah, I was in the wrong place, and I'm like getting really frustrated. Dallen's like, I'm right down here in the middle of the field. And I'm like, dude, I'm like standing 10 meters from the middle of the pitch. You're not there. I didn't say that. That was going through my head.
Chris, I lost your audio there, pal. I don't know what happened.
Oh, okay, that's odd. Okay, just a moment. Oh, my goodness, what's going on here? Wow, hang on there. Audio. Gee, many crickets. Okay, do you have me back now? Can you hear me? Oh, my goodness. If you cannot hear, let's test mic. Hello, hello, hello.
That's super strange, my friend.
That is strange. Oh, my goodness. What is going on here with this? Okay, are you there? Can you get me now?
There you go. You're back. Wow.
Yeah, okay.
It's all good. This is the first rugby one is off to a flying start.
Yeah, so Rugby Ascended is collapsing on Chris's end. Yikes. Okay, so yeah, what I was saying there, sorry folks, hopefully everybody's back and not disappearing on me because of the microphone issue, but what I was saying is that Dallen is absolutely correct. I was in the wrong place. It just this out, and so he's telling me he's right in the middle of the pitch, and I'm like saying to myself, I didn't say it out loud because you don't want to offend your friends. I'm like, dude, I'm like 10 meters from the middle of the pitch. I don't see you. Where are you at? And finally it dawned on me. I looked down. Wait a second. Because he said something. I'm like, he's not at the Toyota City Stadium. Where's he at? Anyway, so we figured it out. We were in the wrong place. Eventually, we did link up in Kobe, though. And in Kobe, which was kind of a cool spot because I got to meet Hanko Hammershøi. I met his mother and later his father, and I met him at that game against England in Kobe. And after the game, we went to the hotel and hung out and had dinner with Gary Gold and the team. It was really cool. So Kobe is special for me for that reason. But then I got to meet you and Joel. And the only problem with meeting him after the game is that I thought people would leave, but no, everybody hung around. And so you're not, sorry, Dallen, but you're not nearly as famous as Joel Stransky. I mean, let's be honest, okay?
Oh, no, Joel's the man. You're kidding me? For me, it was an unbelievable honor, to be able to work with him and spend a month with Joel. He's a super nice guy. Hear the stories from 1995 and the insights he had. We even attended an event that was meant for Chester Williams, but Chester had sadly passed. And so we went there to honor Chester and hearing the stories Joel talk about him and things like that. It was just wonderful to get that insight and background, from an absolute.
Yeah, the passing of Chester was really sad. I mean, he just launched a beer brand, and I was looking forward to trying his beer in Japan. And then just before we take off, we hear he passed away. It's really sad. He went before his time.
Yeah, certainly. We did sample his beer, an IPA, and we sunk quite a few. Joel's not a big drinker, so I had to hold up the fort on his side.
Yeah, but what I was saying is that so the disadvantage is like when you came out, not as many people know you. Some people recognize you. Oh, Dallen came over and crowd around you, but it wasn't too many that I could get rid of them or wait them out. But then Joel comes out, and it's like 1,000 people come flocking over to Joel Stransky. I'm like, I'm never going to see the guy now. What's going on here?
Hey Chris, when you kick the winning kick for your country, that's unbelievable moments in the way you did it. And of course, as we know, with the implications it had for a divided nation, you couldn't write that script. And even though there was a movie about Invictus, the rugby portion of that didn't really do it justice. They did tell the story at least a bit though.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to put up on the screen here really quick now. This is a photograph of us at Kobe at the Rugby World Cup, folks. In the middle there, you see Dallen wearing a Quagga Burger jersey, which I assume is about a Sevens player. But anyway.
It's actually not. I'll give you.
It's
actually not. No. So growing up in South Africa, I had several friends that attended university in Durban. And there were some funny chaps there. And there was this drink called cane, C-A-N-E, made from the sugarcane fields in Durban. And that stuff would make you go crazy and do silly things. But they did spawn a couple of funny stories and a couple of funny one-liners. And one of them was if somebody was like having a go at you, they're like, I'll eat you like a quagga burger. Quagga is an extinct bird in South Africa, and so it does not relate to Quagga Smith. It's really cool he has that name because then you can use that phrase as well. But I'll eat you like a quagga burger is where that came from, and so people like that shirt. So we've been selling a few of those.
Interesting. So, and to the right in the photograph, you see me with the Japanese thing on my head there, and then there's Joel Stransky with his arm raised. So this was, and I don't know who some of these other folks are. They jumped in the photo, but some of them Dallen knew, but the others just kind of got there. But anyway, so that was us at Kobe last year. What amazing stuff, amazing event. So hey, let's go ahead and get right into it and talk about some of the stuff. So, all right, so the folks understand a little bit better. Dallen, you were born in South Africa, you grew up in South Africa, and then later came to the States. So tell us a little bit about growing up in South Africa.
Yeah, so I grew up in Cape Town. I spent a little bit of time actually in the Eastern Cape before that. My father grew up in the King Williamstown area in East London, and then they met at Stellenbosch University. So kind of like, Western Cape was home to me. And, playing sports was always in our blood. My mom actually was in the Guinness Book of Records for non-stop tennis. She played with 3 students from Stellenbosch University when she was there for like 50 hours, whatever it was. So she swam as well for Western Province and the Free State. She actually played rugby until she broke her nose. It wasn't allowed for young girls to play rugby at that point. But it was kind of always in the blood for me to play sports, and I loved it so much. I went to Rondebosch Boys High School and then UCT and played a lot at those 2 different institutions and had a brilliant time on and a brilliant time off the field. I'll quickly give you a quick story here because a friend reminded me of the other day. So one of the reasons why I wasn't invited to a Blitzbox Sevens trials was because at a UCT rugby function, we were about 20 years old. We had a good season. Brent Russell was in our team, standout for the Springboks in that era, 2002. And we brought all these trophies back and to our clubhouse at UCT, and they were like, we want you to present these. There's a big special event going on there. And the guest speaker is Nick Mallett. And at the time, he was coaching the Springboks. So we went along. This is really great. But we were more interested because they said you can come to the bar because it's unlimited drinks for you, Brent, and your vice captain. So there we go. We have these trophies on display. Elegant event. Everyone's dressed up in suit and tie. And here, us 3 students happen to be there with the trophies, funneling it up like you've never seen. John Deere's going down like hot curries. And then I got dared 400 Rand by my good friend Grant Kaleski, who you met in Japan. He was there to tackle Nick Mallett. And as a student, 400 Rand was a lot of money back then. Now it's worth 50 cents. So I launched across the room, dived, and as I tackled him, I realized, oh no, what have I done? And I landed on a table. He was knocked out the way, and the table broke in half, and all the glasses came together. The DJ stopped the music, and everyone just froze. And I was, down at the bottom of the floor thinking, I'm a dead man. Anyway, slapped me on the head, helped me up, and said, what are you drinking? And so it was pretty cool, hilarious university story there for you.
Yeah, speaking of UCT, I do think you have a little Sevens story. Is it a Sevens story from UCT that you can share with us?
So that was my UCT playing days. There was some funny run-ins with some Springboks at the time, at the Green Man. That's where Bobby Skinstad and Big Joe Van Niekerk and all of them had a couple of good nights out, and we would join them as well because we knew a few friends that knew them. So the off-the-field shenanigans were pretty fun, I will say that. Playing for UCT, playing for the Tornadoes, another cool team out there. I think the best thing about sport is that you have fun playing the game, and of course you have brilliant people you get to meet, but it's also off the field, whatever you get up to, that's always the best memories you have.
Yeah, I know. I have to say though, when you talk, you've got kind of a sports heritage in the family. But someday, maybe if I meet your mom or talk to her, I'm going to ask her what inspired her to play tennis for that long. That's insane. I used to play tennis, and after a couple of rounds, I'm done. It's too much.
Well, she was an extreme sports person, and to this day, when I go back every year for the Cape Town Sevens, I make sure I get her tickets. We go watch together. I've been fortunate enough to be able to commentate the last one, so then I would visit her in between the games, and she's absolutely fanatical. My mom, shame as she's been ill in the last 10 years. She's had Parkinson's, so movements are a bit slower, but we arrive at the stadium on day 2. It's the quarterfinals. The Blitzboks are playing, and she can, we're a bit late because her movements are slower, but she hears the siren, which sounds that the game's about to start, and she just took off. And so I had to run to keep up with her. I'm like, wow, this is not a 70-year-old lady who has Parkinson's anymore. She wants to get there for the Blitzboks games, and she supports the Eagles as well. So you'd be proud to know.
Oh, that's awesome. Shame to hear about your mom, but I hope she's well under the circumstances. But it sounds like she's a big fan of yours.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's fantastic. And my sister, Melissa, who actually lives in England, she's about to give birth in the next 24 hours. So obviously thinking of her as well. Wow.
That's I'm sure she's got a lot on her plate at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Shame, man. That's a real doozy. But of course, it'll be great if we finally have, because my wife and I don't have any kids, so it'll be nice to have be an uncle finally.
Well, that'll be cool. So, listen, I didn't get introduced to rugby till university because, like I said, I grew up in rural Appalachia. We just don't have rugby there, even to this day. We're happy to have electricity and paved roads. It's kind of a big deal having that stuff. But so in South Africa, of course, South Africa, New Zealand, kids grow up with rugby, especially certain communities. So, how were you introduced to rugby? How'd you get into the game initially?
Yeah, so my grandfather was a big rugby enthusiast. My uncle played for the Springboks long ago, but from the other side of the family in the late 60s and 70s. So it was a sport that you just fell into there. I got a rugby ball at the age of 3 or 4. I played all sports. I played cricket. It was terrible. I could barely swim, so water polo wasn't the sport for me. The only reason I did okay at hurdles during athletics at Rondebosch is because no one else took part in the hurdles. So my father was like, if you run the hurdles, you're going to place in the top 3 because there's only 3 competitors. And so the other 2 guys fell down, and I ended up winning it. And so I did hurdles. But yeah, rugby was my love and passion. Playing touch rugby was my favorite. Playing sevens actually was something I really enjoyed. It just wasn't offered much in South Africa. We had a tournament once a year, and the rest of it was 15s, But sevens was always something I was interested in. So that's kind of my pathway to the game,
Yeah, no, but you mentioned sevens, and we'll get a little more into this as we go through the conversation, but one of the great things about rugby is anybody can play. You know, it's not just these big, massive hookers or really tall locks that get in the game, or just fast guys on the wing like Brian Habana, you know, guys with speed like that, or Sebat Sanatla. You've also got little dudes like your Herschel Yankees and Gio Aplon and skinny guys. Anybody can play the game. There's a position for people all over the pitch.
Yeah, Chris, I will say that was a, you know, having smaller players was really cool, because again, I'm a tiny rugby player, especially compared to South Africa standards. So for me, the highlight was playing at Rondebosch. We would play against the Southern Suburb schools. The Bishop's Rondebosch rivalry is really cool and special, and you play against Windhoek, Sax, and a bunch of other great schools. But the biggest rivalry was playing against all the Afrikaans schools, and they were massive. You know, playing against Skalkberger and Marius Hubert, who played Springbok outside center. They all played at the Paul Roos, Paul Jim, Bolanapa, all those Afrikaans schools, and they normally would smash you. But in our year at Rondebosch, our final year at high school, we had some really good players in our team, guys who go on and represent the Springboks, like Kubani Bobo and Hayani Shimangi, and a couple other really talented players. And so we actually beat Paul Boys and Paul Roos. A lot of them were the first time in 15 years.
Wow.
So it was a really special year. And then we went to university, and all the Western Cape schools came together and played at university. And then we played against Stellenbosch. And what was bad about Stellenbosch is that not only did they have, the Skalkbergers of the world and everybody else playing against you, but they had two teams in the same league. So you could play their second side, could absolutely smash by 50 points. It wasn't uncommon. But it was really cool, because in our year we actually tied with Stellenbosch 8-8 InterVarsity, which is the big game. And then we beat them on the return game. And since then, UCT have gone to do brilliantly great things. But we were kind of one of the early groups that had reasonable success during the Afrikaans sides, and it was absolutely epic, you know. And just one quick story. So as a small player, you know, I was playing center. So I was about, 80 kilograms. And it was kind of like that image of Frank Bunce running against the Springboks when Percy Montgomery played center for a game and got absolutely clattered to the ground. He went down like a homesick mole, and Bunce fended him to the face. And then after the game, Frank Bunce was asked, what do you think of Percy Montgomery at center? And he says, I don't rate 80 kilogram centers, full stop. So anyway, that was me. I was an outside center, 80 kilograms, playing against these big Stellenbosch guys. But one moment I do have that I cherish dearly is that I was wearing a scrum cap, a maroon scrum cap, which gave me a bit more self-confidence, like the American football players do, that you could dive. And I'd always lead with my shoulder, but diving and hitting somebody at full speed when they're running and not looking was very highly effective for me as a young rugby player in South Africa. And I kind of got a chance to play against some of the bigger teams that way. And so my favorite moment is running and tackling the outside center for Stellenbosch. I think his name was Veermar Raats at the time. And he received a skip ball from the fly-off, so he wasn't looking at me. And I hit him in the sternum, and he lost his mouthpiece, and he unfortunately had to leave the field. And so, you know, it was a good little marker from an 80-kilogram player. You're like, okay, UCT have some tricks up their sleeves.
No, it's quite amazing when you see some of the smaller guys. When you hit people, like you say, from an oblique angle, particularly when they're not expecting it, you can have quite an amazing. You can really take guys out. It kind of reinforces the stereotype about rugby being a tough game when you see that sort of hit. But I mean, we've seen small players just level guys. It can be amazing.
Oh, absolutely. But I will say, Stellenbosch got me back after that. So just, you know, Stellenbosch 2, UCT 1.
I was going to say, I'm sure you had a little payback coming after that. So, all right. So here we're talking South Africa. You went to University of Cape Town. All right. Now, how did you rock up in the United States and you're playing sevens for the USA Sevens? What's that all? Is this like a spy operation? What's going on here?
So after high school, I took a year out and I went to England and spent a year there. I coached sport and stayed in a boarding school and had a brilliant time with like a gap year. So I wanted to do the same kind of experience after I finished at UCT. My father was a big proponent of me, you know, getting a higher level education and studying something that was useful in the world. And so I did marketing and advertising. And, you know, he said to me, Dallen, you would love to play for the Springboks, the Blitzboks, but if that doesn't happen, you need to have a plan B. And that was very clever because I was not on a path to represent South Africa in sport. And so I didn't go to the US to look at another alternative that way, but I went to travel and do the gap year. And so I had a good friend from University of Cape Town, Hilton Warmbach, that was living in Los Angeles. And he said, hey, listen, there's a team called the Occidental Old Boys. They're looking for rugby players. Their coach happens to be South African, and he was at Rondebosch, my high school, 10 years ahead of me. And so I met him. had a brilliant time, played 15-a-side for them in Division 2 in California. I didn't know rugby was a thing in the US, to be honest. But the thing that sold me on America in the sporting side was the 7-a-side season. Mm-hmm. We had 2 months during the summer playing in beautiful venues. First time I went to San Diego. First time I got to go to Las Vegas, Santa Barbara, all over the place, and we were playing sevens. It was an unbelievable time on the field and off the field. And so they got me a visa to come back the second time around. And that story is kind of an interesting one because they got me into, actually early on, into broadcasting. I was going to work at Fox Soccer that had a rugby channel. And I was going to work in their department there. And even if it was pouring coffees, I would have had work experience. But the day I arrive in America, I get told by my boss that Rugby Channel is no longer, the soccer's bought it out. So you're here for a year and a half, but you have no job through us. You can try ask somebody at the rugby club if they have a job for you. And so happened that the rugby coach's twin brother opened up a South African restaurant called the Springbok Bar and Grill in Van Nuys in Los Angeles. And so my first day I was working there, obviously as the only South African and speaking Afrikaans and that sort of stuff. And it was just absolutely brilliant. But the person that trained me ended up being my wife today, 15 years later. So
wow.
Yeah, so she never heard of rugby. She's like, there's some crazy African bar, but her sister lived next door. And so that's how I met my wife, and that's how I ended up staying in the US.
Wow. Well, then at some point, somehow you linked up with the USA Sevens. How'd that come about?
Yeah, so I honestly didn't know that was a possibility. So I played with the Occidental All Boys. Coach was James Walker. He ended up having foresight to know that we had some really good sevens players on our side and wanted to team up with the best team in that Southern California region. Back in San Diego was a team called Balmont Shore. So Balmont Shore and Oxy merged together, and we called ourselves the Oxy Tigers. And in 2006, we had a really good summer seven season, and we went to nationals, the top 16 teams in the country. And at that tournament, we didn't know who these other players were, or teams were. We just played our regular game, and we made to the quarterfinals. We lost by a try, and then we won the rest of the game. So we came fifth. We only lost one game. And after that, I got a call from the US Sevens coach, Al Caravelli, saying, I want you to invite you to try out. And I said, that's great. What do you want me to try out for? And he said, the USA Sevens team. And I said, well, you can hear my accent. I'm South African. and he said to me, well, you're married to Verity. You have been in the country for 3 years now by this time. So you're eligible to play on the Sevens World Series if you make it. And so that was like, I'd never heard of that. And I went to trials. And just so you know, by the way, in 2006, that tournament, Perry Baker was playing for Daytona Beach, I think it was. Oh. So that was kind of funny. I went through an all program. It was the only time I outscored Perry Baker. But or according to be fair.
At least there was once.
Yeah, exactly. So then I got a chance to go to tryout, and the great thing about Al Caravelli was that he gave everybody a fair chance, and he started a new era for the USA Sevens. He got us to play in 3 tournaments on the Sevens World Series in 2007. We did really well. We made then 6 tournaments the following year, got invited to that, and then became a core side in 2009. And so it was a real progression. We had players like Taku Ngwenya, who people had never heard of until he rounded Brian Abana. We had obviously Todd Clever, the face of USA Rugby, phenomenal on and off the field. Chris Wiles was huge during that time. Kevin Swern, Johnny Nakika, just a bunch of great players for the US. And sevens is a cool game because you can have a chemistry, and you might not all have the individual talent, like myself, a bit of a park car, but you have a good group, and you're able to travel well, and you can upset some of the better sides in the world.
No, it's interesting. James Kennedy from Rugby United New York has suggested that I get Chris Wiles on the program and interview him. So I'll try to do that at some point.
Chris is unbelievable. He's honestly such a good friend as well. What he's done in his career is fantastic. And Wolfpack Lager is the other hat. I'm not wearing it now. He's done brilliantly on and off the field. He's just one of the nicest guys. And his nickname is Shrek, by the way, because he does look like the Green Monster.
I did not know that. Okay, that's good. Some of the nicknames I know, of course, like Peaches, Mike Petrie. I'm going to try to get him on the channel sometime soon too. That's interesting stuff there. So actually, for folks who don't know, USA Sevens, we weren't a mainstay of the HSBC series. It wasn't until you were on the team and those other folks you just talked about that got us into it on a regular basis in 2009. Ever since then, the USA Eagle Sevens have been a mainstay on the men's side.
Yeah, Chris, I will say we had a funny analogy when we were at the, I think it was the Wellington Sevens, like 2008, 2009. And we had just beaten Fiji for the first time in our era. And it was pretty funny. Someone said to us, the hot dog vendors are earning more money than us today. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, we were getting paid $100 a day and we had day jobs, and this is obviously something we would do it for free, obviously. But it was just interesting to know that, the sport, while we were professionals, we weren't paid as professionals. And so that was the tricky thing. I'll never forget going back to our house in LA and then going to the field with no rugby poles, obviously, and kicking at a lamppost at late night, to practice my drop kicks. And then the next week I was at, a Hong Kong Sevens in front of 40,000 people trying to kick a drop, conversion for the poles. You know what I mean? Like the difference was pretty stark compared to our friends in South Africa for the Blitzbox, who were getting paid handsomely to play the game. So it was an interesting time period, and it's really, really remarkable to see how the US have progressed, particularly under Mike Friday, and so many brilliant players have been unearthed as well.
No, it's absolutely amazing. Both the men and women's sides these days are just amazing. I really thought we were going to take it the previous year there. We were so close winning the series. It was on knife's edge, and then it came down to the last weekend. But still, second in the series and winning all those tournaments that year. It was coming in second place so often. Pretty amazing stuff. The Sevens is quite an exciting thing. It's the thing that I like about Sevens is that it's an event. You're not going to watch a game. You're going to watch an event. And don't go to the loo because you're going to miss the game.
The atmosphere, the festival nature is remarkable, and it doesn't. A lot of people ask, what's the best tournament to go to, and Hong Kong is the most prestigious, but like the Cape Town Sevens is unbelievable. It's sold out within a few minutes, and what a location. All the tournaments around the globe are just such a great spectacle. And as you said, it can be a family outing. It can be, you could just be there to meet up with your mates. And it's so exciting because you've got all these different countries playing against each other with different styles as well. It's so contrasting and so unique. And obviously it's tricky that, the series had to end early this year and who knows what next year holds. But it really is remarkable. I always tell my friends, I'm like, don't go to 15's game, come to a Sevens tournament, start there, and then you can appreciate the game,
Yeah, let me do a little housekeeping there very quickly, Dallen. So folks, welcome. If you're just tuning in, which a number of folks have just tuned in, you're listening to the inaugural Rugby Ascendant live stream event. I have prepared videos on Rugby Ascendant here on the Chris Wyatt Africa channel on Indaba Africa. And my special guest for the inaugural session is Dallen Stanford, former USA Sevens player and World Rugby commentator. We're talking about his origin story. He's our superhero today. So talking about his origin story here. And so I just want to let folks know what they're listening to. So let's get back to this. Now, Dallen, let me shift gears a little bit here. You and I have talked quite a bit about developing the sport, particularly in the U.S. A lot of people around the world don't realize that rugby's been here for a long time, and it's actually been quite popular, but it was only at the club level and university and that sort of thing. But now it's finally getting a grip at the professional level, and we have national teams that are doing well. Even our 15 side did amazing in Gary Gould's first season. They went 9-0 in test matches. Not so great the second season, but they did great that first season. But you're involved in trying to promote the sport, and you're involved in something called Play Rugby. Can you tell us a little bit about Play Rugby and what it does?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the strongest component of rugby in the US is its youth rugby and getting young kids to play the game. And that I think was the main difference when I arrived in 2003 was not everybody who was 6 years old or 7 years old were playing rugby, obviously. There were so many other American sports. But the great thing is to see youth programs develop across the country, not just on the East Coast where we're strong, but California as well and Texas now. And the organization I spent 7 years with in LA, I have since left the nonprofit, but hoping to get involved again here on the East Coast. It's called Play Rugby USA, which basically use rugby and the tools as an opportunity vehicle for social change for young kids, primarily from underserved areas. So in Los Angeles, I'd go to a lot of schools where I would be the only white person at the school introducing rugby, and the kids loved the sport. They absolutely loved what it stood for, that everybody was equal on the field. There was no quarterback, no star player, and everybody could play. The biggest questions they had for me was like, do I make the team? I'm like, of course you make the team. You arrive here, you're on the team, you're playing. And so the great thing too was young girls, giving them confidence to play a sport traditionally reserved, for their male counterparts, and they were dominated it because they listened, they took your advice, and they would carve up the young boys. So the organization is still going strongly, particularly in New York City, and I would say youth rugby around the country is very strong, and that's the base you want, because it's about the values and about the game. You don't have to go on and be a professional player, but if you play rugby, you have an opportunity to travel the world. You can use rugby as your passport, like I did, and you can also make a bunch of new friends. And then, of course, those values I spoke about are so important for you to have through your life.
No, I absolutely agree. That's the thing I love about rugby is anybody can play. It doesn't matter your background, like I say, not just your physical stature, your size. People have these misconceptions about the game who don't know about rugby and think you just got to be this big, massive player with cauliflower ears to play rugby. It doesn't quite work out that way. I was talking to somebody recently who grew up in South Africa, and I asked her, I said, "Did you play rugby?" She's like, "No, girls don't play rugby in South Africa." I said, "Well, that's a shame. They should play rugby. We do it here in the U.S. It's gaining a lot of popularity. Some really talented players on the women's side. Let's see, we got Nia Tapper, we got Chris Thomas, Lev Kelter, lots of really talented players on the women's side, plus many others up and coming. So it's quite an amazing sport, and the key, as you said, is getting out to youth. I mean, if I'd been introduced to it as a kid, it would have been awesome, but we just didn't have that sort of sport. It wasn't around. And let me bring this in really quickly. So one of my complaints about the South African Rugby Union is that people are talking about, trying to get more folks involved in the sport. And my issue with it is that historically, even to this day, most Springboks tend to come from a few feeder schools that are rugby oriented at varsity level, bringing kids up and then into university. And if you really want the sport to be more widespread and more people involved in it, you need to be in townships, you need to be in the countryside, you need to be in the urban centers, you need to be wherever kids are at, and introducing the sport, making the equipment available, coaching folks, running leagues, teaching them the rules of sport, teaching the values of rugby, because rugby has some great values, and inclusiveness is one of those.
Yeah, you're certainly right. First, I will say that the Imbokodo, the Blitzbok women's side, made their debut recently at the Cape Town Sevens last year, and so that's wonderful to see. It's a program. Of course, we hope a lot of young girls start playing rugby in South Africa and get that opportunity to play as well. But speaking about the youth component, there are a couple of organizations doing some wonderful work in South Africa. One of them, incidentally enough, my connection to the program is through my UCT coach called Brendan Fogarty. He coached me at the under 20 levels. Just a wonderful guy, a very, very smart rugby brain as well. But the Abuja Rugby and the Learning Academy, and basically they do go into townships. They use some of the resources that they get from the Western Cape schools and rugby folks as well, and to give back to the game and get folks playing from all walks of life, which is really cool. And then on the non-contact side as well is Tag Rugby, a guy called Stuart McConnell. I got a chance to see his program in action when I was in Cape Town last, and it reaches all areas in the Cape, all over. And the great thing is they get these kids from all different townships to come together and play against kids from Clifton and the Western Cape as well. So everybody gets immersed into rugby culture, playing the same game with the same rules and everything else like that. So those programs I think are wonderful for the upliftment of everybody, and of course we need more programs like that around the country.
Now, of course, rugby is not just the raw talent of players and their individual athletic ability. It's also, and okay, I don't know if people agree with me, but I will say that you can see an immediate difference in coaching. I'll give two examples. I'm not criticizing previous coaches because it also comes down to player selection. It makes a big difference. I don't think this was the best Springboks team that was available that won, but I think it was perhaps the best team. When I mean individual talent, there were players who I think could have been on that team and would have excelled, but this was Rossi did a great job putting this team together to win the World Cup. So let me talk about this. So what I'm talking about specifically is coaching. And two examples to me are Gary Gold comes into the U.S. and the team just gets lit up. He changes some of the players around a little bit, mixes up, gets a team gelling. They work as a team, and they're very successful. They win the America's Rugby Championship. They go 9-0 in test matches. A brilliant season. They beat Scotland. Amazing. And then we see the same thing. Eddie Jones comes, replaces Stuart Lancaster in England. And the England club was in disarray. I'm not blaming Stuart Lancaster. There was other things going on there, but it was in disarray. And Eddie comes out of nowhere, and they tie the world record for most consecutive test matches. Well, for major rugby teams. I know there's a minor country that's got like 40 consecutive wins, but they tie with New Zealand. And so, I mean, coaching makes all the difference in the world. The reason I mention this, Dallen, is because you're also involved in this program that takes aspiring U.S. coaches or existing U.S. coaches to England to be involved in the Premiership rugby. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Chris, so you're right. That's in the US, there's you need the playing population, and then B, you need, adequate coaches that have the skills and rugby IQ to be able to, teach the basics as well and the advanced level in the US. So the program is through Friends of British Council, a nonprofit that is based in the US. We partnered up with Premiership Rugby, and basically we send over around about 50 coaches, male or female coaches, to England for a week experience and immersion into Premiership Rugby. They get a chance to visit 3 different Premiership clubs and go to inside the inner workings and get a chance to speak to their head coaches, all the staff. They take their what's called the USA a level 300 coaching certification, which normally would take a weekend to do in the US. It's not available in your state always. You'd have to fly there. So that expense could be upwards of $1,000. So the fact that they get a scholarship to go to England, where rugby was founded, and to rub shoulders with these Premiership, which has been going around for 20 odd years, and is such a competitive league, is fantastic. And then of course they get a chance to visit the local sites and take in a bit of the culture. They also get to meet their fellow coaches from around the country in the US. We have coaches, from representing 35 different states already, and they get a chance to express their issues and problems in their own community and how they can solve those as well. Then once they go back to the US, they get a chance to take some online webinars hosted by some of Premiership's top minds. So it's a really, really wonderful program. We've seen almost 100 coaches take part in this over the last couple of years. Obviously, right now we've stalled until it's safe to travel. But yeah, the Premiership Rugby Scholarship Initiative is something that's close to my heart, and it really is helping uplift the game here in the US.
No, I agree. It's absolutely amazing stuff. I've seen the scholarship opportunity where people can apply for that scholarship several times, and I'm like, maybe I'll do that. But no,
I'll put a good word in for you.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. That'd be brilliant. But no, it's quite an amazing program, and I think that really ultimately will have a great impact for the sport in the U.S. because, as I said, and I think you agree, it's not simply talent. I mean, you can have the best talent in the world and not have a winning team in any sport, but especially in rugby. Rugby, you've got to get people to commit to be team players, to do that offload at the right time, to take that hit for the team so that someone can break free. It's all about teamwork, whether it's sevens, which sevens is really fast, or it's 15s. You really got to be a team. And players have talent, but players with talent that don't work together and aren't coached well aren't going to win.
Yeah, you're 100% right, and that's something I go back to on my experience on the Sevens World Series is that a team can be any side that has individual stars. You could have Quade Cooper on your side, but you could still smash them by 50 points. It's all about playing together, being that close unit, and you develop that bond. When you really care for everybody and you're allowed in a positive environment. There have been US coaching staff members. Shout their players, but they have that kind of difference between their players where it's my way or the highway, where you got other inclusive coaches like Gary Gold that come in and are like, hey, I'm part of this group. Let me know how I can do my job and how I can help you. And they let us all get better. And I think that's a big fundamental difference between the coaching style and philosophy as well. So take the input from the players and take the input from your other staff members as well. As losing your ego in that and looking at what the goals are for the organization. And that's really worked in the Sevens program for the men and the women and the 15 side as well.
Absolutely. And you touched a little bit earlier. I didn't really spend much time on it, but listen, I think we all owe a huge thanks to Mike Friday. Wow, what a difference he's made with USA Sevens.
Yeah, Mike Friday, he's a remarkable coach. I mean, going over, obviously England is a world-renowned rugby playing nation, so we'll leave them for the side for now. But going to Kenya and getting Kenya into the top 6 sides in the world was ridiculously amazing. And who doesn't love the Kenyan crowd going absolutely wild when their side's on fire? That is just one of the best things. Still gives me goosebumps to watch them play and how excited they get. In fact, I will never forget my first experience at the USA Sevens was in Los Angeles, 2005, about there. And I went missing for 2 days because I was stuck in the Kenyan crowd supporting the tournament as a fan. And it was absolutely glorious. But Mike Friday, what he's done with the US side is truly remarkable in that, yes, we've got players that are absolutely amazing, like the Perry Bakers of the world and Danny Barretts and Colin Isles and Thomas Seens and all of them. But to bring that side together to compete consistently week in, week out with the other countries, that is a phenomenal one. Because sometimes you have a side that is so good, they will do well one weekend and then drop off the second weekend. And as consistent as Friday was last year, I think it's going to be a tough task to ever beat that again. To make all 10 rounds of semi-finals in a row is remarkable. No other side was able to do that. So it's really exciting, and hopefully we have to play rugby next year and we can see the US carve at the Olympics, because it's very important, Chris, that the US gets on the podium, hopefully on the men and the women's side, and that I think was missing in 2016. So the growth, the tipping point, if you will, in the US never happened. And sure, Major League Rugby is doing wonderful work in the 15-a-side game, but we need the women's game to advance as well as the men's sevens game.
Yeah, the 2016 Olympics was disappointing for me on 2 levels. I honestly expected the Blitzbach to win it. and then USA to come in and maybe get a bronze, and it didn't happen. It was really disappointing. Maybe the next time, and it was of course canceled this year. We were in Japan for the Rugby World Cup. Man, we got out just in time. Just in time.
Yeah.
Thank goodness the World Cup happened when it did, and not like the Olympics, which has now been postponed.
Yes, exactly. But I will say about 2016, what people may remember as well is that a team like Spain beat New Zealand.
Yeah.
And so and that's the interesting thing about sevens and why we love it so much. And I suppose a question people have for me, being based in America now, heavily involved in rugby, is when will the US 15-a-side team compete with the top 10 sides in the world? And the answer is a complicated one, but in short, I would probably say 7 to 8 years or 10 years even, because you need that professional program to be running for a long time. You get your younger players through the system and develop that rugby IQ over years of experience playing against top players, where sevens were there already in both the men and women's game.
Yeah, no, but one thing I would add to that, and I've been critical of this in World Rugby, of this, probably why I don't have an executive position at World Rugby. No, I'm just kidding. but I have been critical is that one of my issues with this is that test matches for the, I know some people like the term minnows, but I'm going to use it, but for the smaller rugby nations, and that includes the U.S. when it comes to rugby in the historical sense, smaller rugby nations or rising rugby nations, maybe that's better, like the USA and Brazil and Germany. The only time you play a test match is when you go to the World Cup. That's insane. I mean, that's not exclusively, but that's for a lot. Like Namibia never plays a top-ranked team except in the World Cup. How can you ever improve if your national side never plays against others? So more tests have to, in my view, be available for the smaller nations to improve. I mean, yes, teams are going to get shellacked, 142-0 sometimes, but if you never play against that level of competition, and only a few of your players are actually professional players that play in the Pro 14 or the Premiership or something like that, then you're never going to get there.
Yeah, the developing nations, I think that's a better, probably, as you said, a better way to term it. Developing nations, it's a tricky and complicated situation as well, because World Rugby, rightly so, are looking to fill stadiums and to broadcast deals and things like that. But in North America, I think we are in a decent position that the America's Rugby Championship has been established, so there's more competition, particularly with the likes of a side like Argentina. Even if it's not their best side, we'll take it, But then also some of the touring sides, which Scotland found out in recent times, that you can't just send, your young players. As well want to beat the US, which is great. You want that, and so I think you're right. More high level test matches, but then it goes beyond that. Without having a professional 15-a-side league in your own country, you will rarely ever compete. So if you look at Japan and track Japan's success before they beat South Africa at the World Cup last time, it's because they had a professional system in place for over 10 years, and they didn't rely, although I will say, they didn't rely on overseas players in each side with a huge number. They only had 3 to 5 players, I think it was. So that's another interesting concept where Major League Rugby is struggling to find out what is a good fit. Is it 10 foreign players on the field at all times? Well, they only leave spot then for 5 US qualified players. So that's a different topic altogether. But it's great. Major League Rugby is going from strength to strength, and there's more teams being added each year. And so it's an exciting time to be in rugby in America.
Well, I absolutely agree. It's fantastic. I love it so much so that I went to all of the exhibition games for the DC team, and exhibition, but I went anyway, and I actually wrote about those stories, and then I caught all the home games for Rooney, its first season. And for me, that's an epic journey. That's like a 3.5-hour drive going across the Arizona Bridge, $50 in tolls, going to Coney Island. It was quite a thing. So, but it was worth it. It was good to see the league. It's unfortunate that we got stopped after 5 games this season. This season really had a lot of traction. It was really going somewhere. So I'll get into that in just a moment, but I did want to shift again once more. So knowing your educational background, it makes sense that having played the sport and having a media background in education, then you go into broadcasting, commentary. So how did that come about? Because you had this thing laid on and it kind of fell apart, and then you went working in a restaurant, and next thing you know, you're playing sevens. And so your origin story's all over the place, man. If we didn't know you were honest, we think you're making it up.
Yeah, so look, outside of that restaurant, job, because I couldn't work legally anywhere else. Well, I actually couldn't work legally there, to be honest, but don't tell anybody. I've always been passionate about rugby, and I've always been passionate about being in sports and how it inspires people. Growing up in South Africa, seeing Nelson Mandela use sport for change, it was remarkable and a wonderful, learning lesson and a mentor to look up to somebody like that, the way he's able to forgive people after being in prison for 27 years. And so, knowing that, I always knew I'd be in sports. And so my first chance I got involved was working for Play Rugby USA. I was a media manager for the USA Eagles. I went to the Rugby World Cup in New Zealand in 2011 with the 15 side. I went with a 7 side to Russia, to the packed stadiums there. So I got a chance to do that kind of side of it. And then I got a chance in 2012 through the Rugby Town USA to do a couple of games on the sideline to do some commentary, and then a couple of games inside the booth to do an analyst role. And it was very exciting for me because I knew I wanted to be in broadcasting because I love talking and I love talking about rugby and I love getting excited. So being a lead commentator or play-by-play commentator was something I knew I could potentially do. So the other roles were kind of a bit more difficult. But once I got a chance through them, there was no looking back. I enjoyed it. I learned so much. I try to improve every single game and still trying to improve as I go along because I tend to speak quite quickly. And but I really love having humor and bringing a bit of fun to it as well. You know, I think a lot of the older school commentary, while some of the voices may be brilliant, to me, they weren't as excitable and as entertaining some commentators. So I tried to kind of, change my style to suit what I would like, you know.
But I should mention very quickly before you know, we've lost some people and we've gained some people because load shedding is happening in South Africa. So people have no power. That's why our audience keeps shifting up and down. Some people, like one person, the brew is in, he's down in Natal. He's about to lose power here in a couple minutes. So,
well, one of my commentary lines at the Cape Town Sevens when Ruan Nel scored against Kenya in the quarters was forget load shedding. Ruan Nel's electric 24/7.
There you go. That's a brilliant line. Yeah,
that was my load shedding chirp.
Speaking of which, was it with the Welsh players that Gareth? You did this line during the Rugby World Cup, and it was put in that animation. That little the guy that does sports animations. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
What was the name? Who was the player that you said that for?
Gareth Davis.
Yeah, Gareth Davis.
Yes.
That was hilarious.
That was absolutely epic the way they did the voice of little cartoons and they used our voices. That was so cool, you know. But yeah, to be involved in the Rugby World Cup and every now and again to throw a one-liner here and there, it was really cool and so privileged to have a good chance to do that.
Well, it was funny I mentioned that because I was actually at that game when you were calling it and we didn't link up, so I never heard that. And then I watched the game afterwards because I paid NBC like $1 billion for my to stream the World Cup, and then they turned it off 2 months later. I'm still angry about that, but I watched the game afterwards after watching that cartoon, and then I hear you say, like, that's where it came from. That's the game.
My other one I really enjoyed was Kotaro Matsushima. It was meant to be he's so scary. Freddy Krueger nightmares about him, but I got so excited in the moment and I said he's so dangerous instead of he's so scary. But either way, it's good to throw a couple of things in here and there. I think personally, particularly on social media as well, you're going to need some of those things to kind of get shared around as well. And if you can add a bit of humor to it, that's great, you know.
Absolutely. So let me ask you about this. So you're a broadcaster for the HSBC Sevens Series, traveling all over the world. Do you get to every tournament, or are there select tournaments you get to each year? Because I know you've done Vegas, I think you've done Vancouver, you've done Hong Kong, and you mentioned Cape Town, of course.
Yeah, so I started, I think it was 2015, and they invited me to do the North American legs. So I did the Vegas and Vancouver legs. And then each year I get one or two added here or there, which is really great. So I got Singapore, and then this year actually was last year was my most that I've ever done. I got a chance to go to Dubai. Now I'd played in Dubai 2 or 3 times already. So it's really cool to go back as a commentator now, like a decade later. And then a chance to go to Cape Town. That was just epic to be able to go home, see family and friends, and then to get paid to work, which really is the funnest thing you would do on a weekend ever, in front of 50,000 as well. It was just surreal. I got a chance to do the one of South Africa's games, the quarterfinals, which was really cool, and then the women's final as well. And then I was meant to do Hong Kong this year, but of course it got pushed aside. So yes, I've gone from generally two to 3 tournaments to now 5 or 6 tournaments in a year, which is pretty exciting. But that's together. Last year was a crazy year for me because I got a chance to do the under-20s in Argentina, and we're there for a month. And then the Rugby World Cup a month in Japan. And outside of that, week in, week out doing Major League Rugby, the America's Rugby Championship. It used to be, a 4 to 5 month kind of job that I was doing. And then I moved to 6 months. And now last year was pretty much all year round.
Yeah, I noticed that because you got a little slow in responding to your email last year. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No, I'm just giving you a hard time. Hey, so the guy with the handle Springbok Sevens TV has a question, and it's Mike Janssen. Or Jansen, if you say it English style. But he says, Dallen is becoming well known for his one-liners on the Seventh Circuit. I agree. That's why I brought the topic up. Do you put any thought or preparation into it, Dallen, or does it just come right out of your head in the moment?
Yeah, good old Mike. Yeah, he's a classic. He's a legend. It's a bit of both. And I think but just maybe give you an insight to what a week looks like as a commentator. Firstly, if you're preparing for a test match, it's a lot easier because you've got two sides playing. So you got prepare for 46 players, you prepare the coaches, and then the rival between the two teams. You prepare the stadium, the history that's there as well. So there's quite a lot of work, 4 or 5 days of work that goes into commentating a 2-hour rugby game. And you also take into account things that are significant. So if there's something like, for example, at the Cape Town Sevens, I honestly I don't live in South Africa, but obviously it's my hometown. I go there for 3 weeks or a month at a time at the maximum per year. Some years I'm there for a week only. So I don't get to experience load shedding, right, properly. And so the fact that I go with my commentating friends, Sean Maloney, Carlton Anna, or at Tiana Penatani, they're like, what's going on now? I'm like, don't worry, guys, the power's going to be out for 2 hours. It's called load shedding. And so that's then you think about that in the commentating. You're like, okay, is there a way I can bring this reference in that makes sense and is not just a jamble? And so it did work out. So yeah, there are things you can think of ahead of time. For example, Jaco Reinach, he scored a hat-trick for the Springboks at the Rugby World Cup. I had a couple lines in my head that I, would use when the moment was right. And so when I said he was more dangerous than climate change, that was just because it was such a freak individual try. But I wouldn't want to use that line if it was just somebody catching the ball and diving over 5 meters away, right? So yes, you think about some things. Other things just come off the top, your top of your head, and they could be even funnier than your rehearsed lines. I think it's important to have a bit of both. You don't want to just sound like a recorder repeating things. But if the moment's right and the time is right, get up for it and, definitely get something in there as well.
No, I appreciate that fully, Don. I've never been a TV personality, although I guess, YouTube is sort of pseudo broadcasting, so maybe that counts now. But I was on radio many years ago, and I know where you're coming at. You can't just approach a game. You have to study, you have to prepare. Even if you're an old hand and an old salt at the game, it. Especially like you talk about in sevens, there's so many players that are coming in and out, and if you want to add color to the commentary so that people appreciate it and get involved in it, and having a good commentator makes all the difference in the world. It really, really does. I mean, some people you tune in just because their voice is there. I mean, listen, when Hugh Bladen is talking on a rugby broadcast, I'm going to listen because it's Hugh Bladen, even if it's a varsity game. But it's if you a good commentator, a good broadcast team makes all the difference in watching a game. I remember, just an example is, I remember the World Cup in 1990 when I think the Germans won 1990 or something like that. It was in Mexico. I was living on the border in Arizona near Fort Huachuca. And we could pick up the Mexican television stations over the aerials, the rabbit ears. So I watched the American because they played it, and I was listening to it, and it was like, yes, and so-and-so has kicked the ball up the field and passed it to so-and-so. And then you turn on the Mexican. I don't speak any Spanish. You have no idea what they're saying, but you're so into it. Now, my point is that if you have a good a color commentary and a good broadcast team, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and for me, the main thing is if you're having fun, that should translate to the audience as well. And, like my first few games when I started commentating, I would be speaking at half the volume, and that would come across pretty low key, you know what I mean? So like you're encouraged to be as loud as possible because it doesn't come out like that, and then again, the players you mentioned, preparing for a 7-a-side tournament is no joke because you've got 16 countries to prepare for. And now we often get to call the women's tournament and the men's tournament combined. So now you got double, you got at least 12 women's teams as well. So all these players, all these coaches, there's a lot to take in. And for me, the scariest part is the pronunciations. I didn't do Spanish as a youngster. I didn't do French, and again, it's Xhosa, English, and Afrikaans, so probably and again, I don't know a lot of Xhosa at all. So that doesn't really help you that much. While I can translate Neil Powell's halftime huddle chat, that's great, but it doesn't help you with pronouncing the names, of all these other countries.
Well, some people do us a favor and they make it easy. Names like Cecil Africa, that's pretty easy.
Well, it could be Cecil Africa as well.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Yeah. That's a good point. It's not privacy, it's privacy.
Yes, but I do like because my mom was an Afrikaans teacher for 30, 40 years. So I do like that I get a chance to really give Afrikaans a good go because, to be honest, Afrikaans actually wasn't my strong suit at languages. And so people make fun of me that I'm the one now translating the Afrikaans to the world when it comes to the Sevens World Series. And then getting those names in, as you said, like Charmasace, and really getting the guttural G's and the R's flowing,
Well, and it's even harder because it's Hunko, it has to be an H and then a G. Yeah. No, so ladies and gentlemen, longtime subscribers to Chris Wyatt Africa, members of my channel, paying members, now you know why my G is so horrible in Afrikaans, because I'm listening to a worldwide broadcast from Dallen Stanford. So he's the one screwing up my G's. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it is interesting. The only time I got to use the G's again was when there was the South American qualifier in sevens and Germany were playing. So I got a chance to throw a couple of in there as well, which is great, But outside of that, pretty useless.
I will say this though, I may butcher the G's in Afrikaans, but but the way that they butchered Hanko Gemeshuis's name at the Rugby World Cup, I was in tears. Like, that's not his name. Try it again.
Well, one thing I will say, and I've been advocating this for a while, I think it would be really helpful if there was an online platform just for us broadcasters, for the players to record their names, the quick little soundbite. We've got the technology, the media managers can do it easily, and then you can listen to the names, not just the manager of the team. This is what they did sometimes at the World Cup. The manager would say all their names, and that is helpful for us for sure when it's Georgia playing, but it would be really great to hear the players say their actual names as well.
No, absolutely. And whenever I bring a guest on, that's one of the reasons why you and I spoke ahead of the broadcast. I always talk to them and say, listen, I want to make sure I pronounce your surname, your given name, the way that you pronounce it as best I can. So I always do that. It's easy for me in German and French. I mean, those are languages I've been speaking for 30, 40 years, so it's easy. More difficult when it comes to some names like in Xhosa or Zulu or something like that. Yeah. So we're up at the top of the hour here, folks. Going to go a little bit longer as long as Dallen can stay with us. We've got a few things we still want to cover. You're listening to Chris Wyatt Africa and the inaugural live stream for Rugby Ascended segment here on the Indaba Africa channel. And my special guest today is Dallen Stanford, former USA Sevens Eagle player and World Rugby commentator who covers the HSBC Sevens Series. Also is a spokesman we'll get that in a second, for Glendale Raptors, although they're not called that anymore. They've changed their name. We'll talk about that. And also is involved with Major League Rugby as a broadcaster, and most recently, along with myself, was in Japan for the Rugby World Cup, where he was teamed up with none other than Joel Stransky. So I think some of you may have heard of this guy, this oak named Joel Stransky. He's famous for something. I don't know what it was, but anyway, so you might know who he is. So Dallen, let's cover a few things here. Some big name players you've played with and obviously you've interviewed a lot of big names in sevens and in 15s. You mentioned earlier that you played against Schalk Burger when you were a kid.
Yeah, well, Schalk Burger was hard to miss as a youngster, with the blonde hair flowing everywhere, and we didn't even know what position he played because he was tackling everybody, who was running, scoring tries left, right, and center. And only later did we know, when he became a Springbok that year, we were like, okay, well, that's why this guy was so good against us. But yeah, like in high school, Stuart Abbott played opposite me. He played at Bishops. He went on to win a World Cup for England. The late Dan Vickerman, who played for Australia for many years as well. Actually, we had two Springboks on our side. Brent Russell was my roommate who played for the Springboks. The Pocket Rocket, as he was known, just so elusive from the 7 series and then in 15s. But I think if I look at some of the opposition players, I got a chance to play against Israel Dag when he played for New Zealand. James O'Connor scored a hat-trick against us on the 7 series, and we don't know who this young kid was. He was 17 years old, so he cut us up. The players, I suppose, they came out of Fiji. There's so many legends and massive units as well. And then, a real honor playing against South Africa and so many of the greats that they've come through, in that time period, 2007, 2009, Frankie Horn, I actually just had a chat to him on the podcast, the Rugby Hive Podcast the other day. And for me, it was a dream to play against South Africa. If you can't represent, your home country, it's so great to play against them. But jeepers, they smashed me. I mean, it was obviously because I was South African and playing for another country. But also, unfortunately, I wore these stupid sleeveless gloves because the story goes that in Hong Kong, which is true, it's so humid and hot, the ball slips out of your hands. And I was playing scrum off at the time, so I had to wear them, and they worked there. But I should have left them in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I'm sure you got beat up for that. You got bullied for that, no doubt. Oh, that's interesting. So, Schalk Burger, what a fascinating and what a nice person. At least my experience, having met him a couple times. And he's had some real tragedy in his family, and the guy just keeps ticking. He's had some really tough injuries. Were it not for his injuries, we'd be talking about Schalk as one of the greatest rugby players of the 21st century. Even though I still think he is, but I mean, he would be right up there in one of the top 3 names without a doubt. Do you think?
Yeah. Schalk still ranks in my top 10 list of all time. It's just an unbelievable player. Just puts his body on the line. I mean, he is one of those guys who's like they say, hey, listen, your wheel's broken. He's like, no, I've got another one, I can still go. And he's going for another 160 minutes. Just unbelievable player. And as you said, like off the field, that's the great thing about rugby compared to other sports, particularly American sports, is that all these players are very accessible. So I got a chance to meet Brian Abana on the Sevens World Series. He was doing work with the HSBC as an ambassador and through the Loris Sport for Good Foundation. And I sent him a message, not really expecting to hear back. And he was, yes, I'd love to be on your podcast, and just so friendly and open and just such a nice character. And that's, he's one of many legends that have time for people, even if we're the small fishes,
No, absolutely. You make a very good point, and I don't think this will change, honestly, because rugby's been professional now since about 95 or 96, that time frame. So I don't know if anything is going to change. Maybe, outside our lifetimes, in 100 years it might change. But one of the best things about rugby is, as you just alluded to, Dallen, is that the players are approachable. I mean, I've met Perry Baker, I've met Madison Hughes, Nia Tapper, Chris Thomas, Alev Kelter. I mean, the list goes on and on. Carlin Isles, and also Werner Koch, great guy. It's fantastic. They're approachable. They're easy to get on with. And I think it has a lot to do with the nature of the sport. And some people say, well, it's just because it's not a major sport and they're not famous celebrities. But people like Perry Baker are not exactly not known. He's known. Perry Baker, very down to earth when I met him. He's, these aren't guys with attitudes and gals with attitudes. They're easy to approach. Skalkberger was here for Saracens playing against, who was it, Sal or something like that, in Philadelphia a couple years ago for a disappointing turnout, but a great game. And he came off the pitch at about 70 minutes into the game, sat down. I walked over to the bench and said, hey, Skalk, can I get your autograph, man? And he's like, yeah. And he just said, here, so what do you want me to write there? And so we talked for a little bit. And, that's what I like about rugby. Many of the things I like about it, but that's really cool.
Well, and Scott Brits was there too. He's a character off the field as well. But I'll give you my story. So growing up in South Africa, watching obviously the Springboks play, as a young kid, a player called Donnie Gabber was one of my favorite players to watch of all time, an outside center that had tremendous speed, threw the brilliant dummy and just plow people as well. But outside of South Africa, in New Zealand, I would watch Frank Bunce and Walter Little, the great center pairing for the All Blacks. So you talk about how people are open and accessible. By hook or by crook, there was this chance meeting that through the New Zealand Consul General and Play Rugby USA in Los Angeles, we got a chance to go to Hawaii for a week to do some youth development there with a lot of the young kids there at these different elementary and middle schools. And Frank came across with Walter as the ambassadors of the program. And so there I was spending a week with Walter Little and Frank Bunce. It was in my element, talking all things rugby, working with these young kids. They were taking part in the drills and activities, telling stories about the All Blacks, talking about the haka, the meaning, and all that. Having a few cold jars as well. So imagine the thought a year or two later, we did a couple of trips together after that. When I got an invite, my wife and I got a chance to go to Frank Bunce's wedding in Hawaii. And so there we arrive, and obviously a bunch of his good mates, and I've known him for a few years since then. But I'll finish the story like this. So not only was my element is really cool, to connect with folks who are legends on the field, but just humble off the field. And that's the biggest thing he spoke about. While he's an All Black legend, he's like, that's the policy of the team he was with and the organization, is that you have to be a good person off the field. You can then perform on the field on it. There's no dickhead policy. But anyway, the story goes though, I arrived there with my wife, everything's cool. And Frank comes running up to me and he's like, Dallen, I need help. I go, sure. And what's the problem? He goes, I've got like 2 cases of wine, but I have no corkscrew. And I'm like, no problem. Give me your shoe. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, give me your shoe. And he's like, okay. So off we go down to find a wall. We're on the beach. It was his wedding reception. And I'm thinking to myself, firstly, you've got a bunch of like really strong rugby players. Why do you need an 80-kilogram center from South Africa? No Percy Montgomery. So anyway, though, we take the wine bottle, put it in the shoe, and you hammer it against the side of the wall. I'd only heard this thing worked, and I tried to do it, and the cork moved a little bit. So Frank was like, "Cool." He pushed me aside, said, "Let me finish this off." And 1 or 2 massive smashes. The cork shot out, wine intact, and the party continued. So that's my Frank Bunce story.
That's brilliant. That's how we've just lost more people for load shedding. Someone just dropped off. He's going to switch to his mobile. So Ranger Jakes says that his wife used to work for Cobus Visa in 2001, 2002. That's interesting. Huh.
Oh, Cobus Visa. That is one massive unit.
Oh yeah, wow. He is. That guy is huge. That's for sure. So I mentioned Glendale Raptors, who've now changed their name to the Colorado Raptors, and a bit of a surprise to me, but they've departed Major League Rugby, if I'm not mistaken, in order to develop the game, if that's true. What's your role with them? I've seen you do video shorts talking about the team. What's the role with them?
Yeah, so they're the first organization that gave me a chance into the broadcasting world. And over the years, they've flown me out there 10 to 12 times a year to commentate all the local rugby games they do. Sometimes they host big tournaments, USA Rugby National Championships, and things like that. So I've always gone across and done that for them. And they wanted me to be the voice of Rugby Town USA. So not necessarily the voice of the Raptors, because they're a team that could play or might not play, but do all their women's games and men's games. And so of late, they've made a decision to team up with USA Rugby and house the national body there and host test matches and host training for the USA women and men's 15-a-side teams. A lot of people were, curious about that decision. They were upset that the women's team got dropped, the club side. Mm-hmm. But there were some behind-the-scene things going on there, I suppose, is all I can say in terms of that. They have the best intentions which is to grow the game, and they want to help the young American players, men and women, succeed. And so that's very important. I think they're doing wonderful work there. And again, the cool thing about Magic Rugby is it will be successful because you've got so many individually owned franchises. It doesn't matter if one team leaves because you've got a space now for Hawaii to join. But my role with Rugby Town USA also is to help with their 7-a-side tournament, the Rugby Town Sevens. And so we'll be releasing something soon about that coming up. And so, I do a lot of their broadcasting and a lot of their highlights packages and all that sort of great stuff. So wonderful folks to work for that have been growing the game since 2007.
No, it's interesting you mentioned. I was in Aspen last year to talk about alternative energy in Africa at a conference that takes place out in Aspen every year. And on my way back, my intent was to go to Rugby Town USA, but the timing, I spent like 7 hours going from Aspen to Denver, and that's not a 7-hour drive. And of course, you've got nothing but mountains around you. There's no way around it, so you're just stuck. It was just horrible. But so I couldn't get there. So instead, I went and caught the last 3 innings of a Colorado Rockies game, which went into extra innings, so I got something out of it. But I missed the Rugby Town USA. I'd like to get out there. That's so Glendale's known for that these days. Now, Major League Rugby comes along, and it sort of changes the whole dynamic, from my perspective anyway, as a rugby fan, rugby supporter, somebody trying to promote the game. We had this thing called Pro Rugby, which went a season, and I drove all the way to Ohio to watch the Ohio Aviators play against the Colorado team. And there was no championship because it was just one season, like 6 or 7 teams, something like that. But in the end, that wound up being the decisive game, because if the Ohio Aviators had converted the kick on a try at the end of the game, they would have won the informal title, but they missed it, and they won the game, but they didn't have enough points, so that Colorado wins it. But Pro Rugby was all owned by one gentleman, and he owned all the clubs. And so Major League Rugby is very different with individual franchises that have to make it on their own, although there are things in the league, to work for the league. But my point is that they're individual businesses. And so you have the Sheehy that owns the DC franchise, Kennedy and his group up in New York, and so on. But Major League Rugby, so that came along, and you got involved in broadcasting that. In fact, we linked up at a Rudy game there in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been fortunate because, let's be fair, commentating is a niche market. Commentating rugby in the US is a small market. And so, after getting a chance to do, the Sevens World Series and some of the bigger World Rugby jobs, I did obviously done a lot of local games in the US, all over the country. And so, yeah, it's a natural fit to commentate week in, week out here. Because I think that's one thing that while the players are still developing, the broadcasting side of it, there are not that many broadcasters around, So you have some folks that might not know rugby that commentate rugby in the US. And that's great because you have an American accent and that makes the game sometimes more accessible. But you do need to know a bit more about the game. So, your analyst definitely needs to have played at a high level before to be able to kind of translate and guide that audience, if you will. So, but it's been a treat working, locally. You don't have to travel. I do travel a lot, but you don't have to travel as far sometimes, unless you're going from one coast to the other side. So it'll be interesting to see now. And I know everybody's got their hands up for commentating in Hawaii.
Yeah, I'm sure. Actually, I love the commentate, but for me, the link was that I know what you said. In order to be effective, to be really good at it, you need to compete at a high level. And I've just played informally. I've never played at that level. So that's why I decided not to try to go into it. It makes a lot more sense to try to take this approach. But so let's talk about something else here. I get away from Major League Rugby for a second there, but kind of full circle. 1995 Rugby World Cup is in South Africa. The Springboks win it, Joel Stransky's drop goal. And then in 2019, you're in Japan with Joel Stransky. So tell us your experience at the 95 World Cup, because you had to be just a young pup at that stage.
Yeah, 95 was an unbelievable year for all South Africans. I was 16 years old, and I'd never forget the opening game of the Rugby World Cup was on a Thursday. And I don't know why, but for some reason, even though South Africa's rugby mad, Newlands Rugby Ground in Cape Town had the game, and for some reason we were all at high school and we weren't allowed to leave. And so it didn't make any sense, right? It would never happen at today's age. But be that as it may, myself and a couple other keen, cunning rugby enthusiasts, our Rondebosch Boys High School had uniforms, so we checked into the school in the morning. We went to a couple of classes, and we had a change of clothes ready on hand. We went into the gym, boom, got changed, and then sprinted the across the road, basically, a few minutes away to Newlands. And we had our season pass tickets as well, so they allowed us to go to the Rugby World Cup game. So we got to watch David Campese getting absolutely stiff-armed to the ground as Peter Hendricks scored, and South Africa beat Australia, the current defending champions, in the opening game. And so from that, we erupted onto the field, because you could, go back in the field then, tapping everybody in the back and stuff like that. So that was probably my first interaction with Joel Stransky. He obviously didn't know who I was or knew I was on the field there. But as a young South African growing up, it was so inspirational and so iconic to see Nelson Mandela wear the number 6 jersey of Francois Pienaar's, and to follow the rest of the World Cup. We got a chance again to run at the field and tap Jonah Lomu on the back after he left Mike Catt with a footprint on his jersey, and scored a hat-trick of tries. So it was amazing. I'll never forget, though, that opening night. We actually went out. Normally, being a good school student, we didn't go out drinking or anything else like that, but that was the first time we busted out of my house. A couple of friends were sleeping over, and we went out and celebrated. And we were in the streets in Cape Town with everybody. Everybody was out and about, and that's the cool thing. I think with sport has the power to unite people. Where little else can. And so fast forward to 2019, when I got told that I'll be commentating the Rugby World Cup with Joel Stransky. It's a real moment. Unfortunately, my dad wasn't around to be here to see it, but my mom did, and my sister, and obviously the rest of my friends, and just unbelievable. And what a nice guy too. Just have so much time, and the stories, as I said, he was telling. It was really cool to be with such a legend and such a humble guy. He even said to me, that he hadn't gone back and watched those games from '95. Yes, he sees a couple of clips here and there when they play them, but he was like, "What's done is done. Let's focus on the future."
No, and I have to say this about meeting Joel. It's he is such a nice guy and such a humble guy. And when we met, he was more interested in learning about me and why I was a Springbok fan and why I like rugby. I don't know what you told him, but more interested in that than me getting to know him. So I was trying to be fanboy, and he was kind of being fanboy to me. It was kind of strange.
Well, he did say he's looking, at some point, he's going to travel a bit more to the US when it's safe to do so. So I already gave you address and said, you'd host him for a little while.
Oh, okay. Well, no problem with that. I'm sure we can make space for him. Absolutely. And if that happens, we'll be having in-house live streams with Joel Stransky right here in Chris Wyatt Africa. So that's kind of full circle for you when it comes to Rugby World Cup. I mean, I'm kind of envious of you, Dallen. I mean, that's, not skipping school, but, heading over there and being able to attend those games. I mean, you could never do that today. I mean, you just get into a pitch for a Rugby World Cup that late in the game.
Yeah, the great thing about being in broadcasting and being most of the sport is that you have the big seat in the house as a commentator. You get to go to all these remarkable venues and places, and you get to talk about and bring the game alive. And hopefully you do a good job and people enjoy it. And again, some people won't, some people will. That's the nature of everybody having a say. But you can't let that get you down. You have as much fun as you can. And I will say to be work with Santi Gomez-Scorer from Argentina and Joel Stransky, and then meet a bunch of legends during that trip all the way through. Jacques Fourie and Andries Becker were there. They came to meet up with Joel one night with Gary Gold, telling stories about when the Lions played South Africa in 2009, and the famous moment when Jacques Fourie came off the bench. It was, he was carrying an extra maybe 5 or 10 kilograms, and he smashed 2 or 3 Lions players to score the winner in the corner. He told a story there. We're having a little, drink on the sidewalk in Kobe, and he says the only reason he scored that try was because him and Dries Becker were on the bench, and they weren't getting much playing time, so they ate a bunch of extra snacks here and there, basically for the whole month they were on tour. So he was carrying 5 or 10 kilograms more, and he said that's why I was able to knock them over.
It's the little things in rugby that make all the difference. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Oh, that's hilarious. I was going to talk about Brian Havana, but we've covered that a little bit earlier, so I'll come back to that. But the 2019 Rugby World Cup really was something else. You called the game with, was it Canada and the Springboks? I think that was the game in Kobe. And Listen, I was at the end of the pitch, at the end of the field, and I got to watch Cobus Reinach's hat trick right in front of me in full. I mean, I think was it the first try he got? It was all over the field, and he kicked it up and did a grubber and caught it midstream right in front of the. Okay, what are your impressions? I mean, you were in the broadcast booth. For me, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And, especially since they were playing like a committee with that position. So this was amazing. And I thought Cobus was just brilliant in that particular game.
He certainly was. And the thing about South African rugby is that, South Africa produced so many great players in similar positions over the years. And, having somebody like back in the day, Farida Priya, who just dominated the game. And talk about Brian Abana, when you speak about asked Brian during the Rugby Hive podcast, who is your best players to play with, or favorite players? And of course, he's going to mention, the Matt Fields and the Scott Burgers of the world. But Farida Priya said to control a game, a player, that guy was unbelievable. But saying, Jaco Reinach, I got a chance to watch his father, during some highlights and stuff like that. So to see his son, Jaco, carve it up, and it just shows you that a player like that, obviously there's a debate. There will always be a debate about positions in any country. And, having somebody like Faf, who would start, and Jaco would come off the bench, or even have other players like Jantjies. Herschel Jantjies is just remarkable. You've got three players that would start in other countries, and imagine the player who's fourth on the depth chart. You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing about South Africa, producing so many good players in similar positions that have to go overseas, because they know if you're fourth in the Springbok lineup, you're not really going to get a look in. But yeah, he was amazing in that game, so special, and it was really cool to call South Africa. I wasn't sure if I was going to get a chance to call the Springboks. I got a chance to call them in Washington DC, but that was a bit of a letdown game against a well side. Most sides send their B side, so this was legit.
Well, that was a bit of a letdown too, because you and I were supposed to link up, and that was a rainy, nasty day in North America's third world developing nation stadium, RFK. What a sad, sad place. And unfortunately, the Audi field wasn't ready yet, where the Major League Soccer plays at, the over at Audi Field. If that had been available, that's a brilliant venue, because it wasn't finished yet. But RFK was disappointing. And Rossi's first game out of the gate, and I was disappointed, but I get what was going on. He was testing players, giving guys like Dinyanti a chance and seeing what they could do. But we handed that game to Wales. We absolutely handed that game to them. I'm sorry. That's my view on that one.
Yeah, well, listen, we were just lucky to get out alive. The stadium didn't crumble while we were there, so take it as a win.
Well, there you go. So speaking of Brian Habana very quickly, you're going to have to link me up with him. I've told people that every time I turn around, I just miss Brian Habana everywhere I go. I was in Wellington for the 2011 World Cup, or not Wellington, in Auckland for the 2011 World Cup. I walked in a sports shop trying to buy some stuff, some kit, and downtown, and I was looking for something specific they didn't have. They said, if you go down the street, this other store, about 200 meters, they might have it. I said, okay, let me go check. So I went down there and I found it, and I came back about 10 minutes later to say, hey, look, I found it. And he goes, oh, yeah, you just missed this South African player. I don't know what his name was. He was here. I'm like, yeah, they're just pulling my leg. And she goes, no, here, let me show you. And she showed her phone on her mobile. It was a picture with her Brian Habana. I'm like, no! She said, he just left. I ran out of the store. I'm looking on the street left and right, and I didn't see him. And that's happened to me like 3 times. In Japan, I missed him twice, too. So I'm going to have to either get him electronically or in person one day.
Yes, well, he did race a cheetah, so that man's still fast, despite what he says.
Oh, no doubt he is fast. That's probably if she'd have said he was gone for 15 seconds, I might have had a chance to spot him. But 2 minutes, it's too late. He's gone. Anyway, so very quickly back to Major League Rugby. Hawaii franchise, that sounds exciting. I think a lot of people really enjoy that. I understand several All Blacks players are reportedly behind this franchise, being the owners of it. That's kind of exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really great. Hawaii, mostly known as obviously a holiday destination, but they have a ton of unbelievable, talented young kids and rugby players that do come and play, rugby here in the mainland or American football, of course. So it's really great that they have a franchise, and hopefully they get accepted. Everything gets signed off, and good to kick off in 2021. We don't know if we're going to have a season, obviously, but it's great to have their interest and have them locked in as well. I also like we have an even number of teams on the West Coast and the East Coast, because that we didn't get a chance to see it this year, but a East Coast champion against a West Coast champion for the final, that's going to be epic.
No, that's great. The first season that was frustrating for me is that there were no teams here. So when Major League Rugby was announced, I'm like, I'm on board. But none of the teams were out here. And so I'm like, so I kind of a like of Utah. And so Utah came out. They had a cool logo. They haven't performed as well on the pitch, but I became a Utah fan. And then I honestly have never been a fan of any New York franchise whatsoever. I mean, it's a nice place to visit, New York, but I've never been a fan. I'm an Orioles fan as a kid for baseball, so I just detest the Yankees. So anyway, but when Rooney announced, I'm like, that's it. I'm a Rooney fan. Then I saw the signings: Cathal Marsh, Mike Petrie, Ben Foden. You know, the list goes on and on. I was like, yeah. And that first season, they came out like gangbusters. 7 out of the first 8 games. I'm like, yes, we're getting the title. And they didn't win it. But then anyway, so.
But it's wonderful to have, you know, such famous iconic cities involved, and Bastille playing for New York as well.
That's right.
Wonderful franchise.
Year, yeah.
That's right, you know. And well, so my wife is from, you know, Boston area, and that's where we are now. So we're obviously Free Jacks fans as well. But again, it's brilliant to see you know, how that program has progressed over the couple of seasons. And you know, as we said, like, I really want to see what happens in 2021, and if it doesn't, you know, take place in the next season, because you've got big names chomping at the bit. You've got Rob Shaw that is signed. We had Nonu playing in San Diego. I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah, Joe Peterson was playing in San Diego too, wasn't he?
That's right, Joe Peterson. What a player! He and JP du Plessis as well.
Yeah.
Peterson saving the Rhinos while he's, you know, kicking left-footed drop goals is bloody legend.
No doubt. Now, you mentioned the 2011 World Cup. You went with the Eagles, or you worked with them, and you went to. Were you in Nelson for the game against Italy? Do you remember that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I traveled with the team. You know, I was their media manager, so we were absolutely there, and it was a close-ish game as well. You were at that game?
Well, I was going to say yes. I was actually one of the games. I got a really good ticket. I was. What I did is I had a hire, so I left it in Auckland, got on Air New Zealand, flew down to Nelson on one of their smaller planes. Stayed overnight in a hotel, went to the game. Quite a great atmosphere in Nelson, because they weren't supposed to have a game originally. I think it was supposed to be in Christchurch, but because of the earthquake, they wound up having a game.
Correct.
Yeah, so it was quite an atmosphere. They were thrilled to have the game, and we had a chance to beat Italy. In fact, they rested Todd Clever. I never get his name pronounced.
Clever,
yeah, Todd Clever. They rested Todd Clever and a few other players to hopefully beat Italy. They thought they might have a chance. It didn't go that way, but I was sitting like almost, I think it was in the first row or very close to the first row. The only problem I had with that game, it was played right in front of me. A lot of it was in that corner of the field. But there were the security guys standing on the field. He ruined every single one of my photographs. This dude is in it standing with his arms crossed right in front of me, like, would you just get out of my way? But it was a disappointing loss. But Nelson was a good experience. So we might have even seen each other at that game and not known it.
Yeah, and another little link for you as well is so when we went to Wellington, the US played Australia, and despite losing 66 points to 5, there was a moment in the game that the US was winning 5-0, and the try was scored by a UCT South African sensation called JJ Gagiano playing flank for the Eagles.
Hey, so I remember that game. I was in Wellington, and I was sitting next to an Australian couple. He was a major in the Australian Air Force, and she was a captain in the Australian Air Force. That's with those weird yellow seats in that arena. Anyway, so I was sitting there, and afterwards we went. Tim Eustace was on there. He's an Australian American. He was the captain that night, and we watched the game, and we were winning. I was like, "Yay, this is exciting!" It won't last long, but it's exciting. And then didn't get the conversion. And then after the game, it's a long walk back down to the hotel. So we're walking back, and like, hey, let's go get a beer in a pub. I'm like, yeah, okay. Australians are like Irish. They're like fish, man. They love to drink. So we go to this Irish pub, and we're hanging out there. And on the way back, he's like, I know the captain of the American team. And so my head's spinning. Like, wait a second. And I didn't know a lot of players in the U.S. team then. So I'm like, okay. An American, you know the American, you live in Australia. I didn't. I'm just like, this guy's BSing me, right? So he's like, let me text him. Maybe we can meet the team at the hotel. I'm like, yeah, okay, great. So we go to this pub and we hang out, and a bunch of drunk people are hanging all over the place, and we're there for a while. He and his partner, because Australians never marry, they just have partners, just like the Danes. Anyway, so we're hanging out there, and we have a few pints, and like, okay, let's go. And it's just like all these messages, like, he's not responding. So I'm like, I'm thinking, they were nice company, it's fine. So we walk out of the pub and like, guys, my hotel's right down the street, and I'm staying here at this Hotel Amore. It's really nice. I was on the same floor with the Argentine national team. Anyway, and I said, wait a second, I got a text. Oh yeah, they're at the hotel now. Let's go over there now. I'm like, yeah, okay. So we walk about 10 blocks over to a hotel, and we get this hotel, and we come down, and there's the U.S. national team, and they all come out, and there's Tim, and then I finally realized that his mother's like Australian, his father's American, and he was the captain that night. So it was quite an interesting experience. But that's something about rugby, people just become cool and mates and friends just like that.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely awesome. Tim, we call him the Russian, but yeah, he's
He does look Russian.
He does look Russian, doesn't he? He was a good character as well. But a quick side note on that thing about being from different countries. I always tell people when I first ran out for the USA on home soil, Bruce Springsteen's song was playing "Born in the USA," and I looked around to my 11 teammates on the Sevens side, and only 6 of us, well, 6 of them were born in America. 6 of us weren't. So about 50%, not bad.
Yeah, but these days we have a lot more folks born in the USA playing for the national side.
Absolutely.
So it's a bit of a change. But I mean, that's a development of the sport. And the irony, of course, the U.S. was competitive in rugby a century ago. We were the 2-time defending Olympic champions until it was reintroduced in 2016. But Dallen, you've been fantastic guest. But before we go, we're going to wrap up here shortly. I don't want to take too much of your time because you've got other things to do. I mentioned your new podcast called the Rugby Hive. Also, your longtime media site, which you started when you were just a kid back there in Cape Town, the Rugby Corner there. I'll put those links in the video after we're done. So I think I already put the Rugby Hive in there, but I'll put the Rugby Corner in there. But let's talk a little bit about rugby and what's coming, because I think you and I have the same view. We're hopeful, but we're being realistic. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, HSBC will be back in December, and we'll see Major League Rugby in January. I'm not getting that feeling, because it looks like this virus, this pandemic is going to be with us for some time, and it may be difficult to resume playing rugby, particularly like the Sevens. I mean, the Sevens, we didn't talk about this, but one of the great things about going to Vegas, and you kind of alluded to it, is that everybody becomes a Kenya fan. Everybody, and so I usually pay for the nice ticket, so I have reserved seats, so when the drunks come occupy my seat, not general admission, I'm like, okay, that's my spot, could you please get up? No, it's general admission. No, it's not general admission, just go over there. Anyway, so I have a seat for the games I really want to watch, but then I always walk all around the stadium and sit all over in general admission too. And so whenever Kenya plays, I'm always on the other side of Sam Boyd with all the Kenya fans, because that's where the party is. But Sevens without a crowd, I mean, 15 without a crowd, it's not going to be fun, but I could see it. But Sevens without a crowd, that's really going to change the game.
Yeah, I don't think Sevens will. Well, I don't think international travel will happen anytime soon. And so with that goes the Sevens World Series, right? Now, Major League Rugby, for example, that could take place potentially if you can get to the matches, not flying or that sort of thing. It's just tricky in general, right? Because you just have to remember that all these players have families, and then rugby is such a contact sport as well. I don't think much is going to change, to be honest, between now and next year. And I know preparations are in place for planning for Major League Rugby, and we'll have to see how the Sevens World Series goes, or any rugby for that matter. And the sad part, of course, is that the US has such a mixed policy and so far behind the rest of the world. While it's encouraging to see New Zealand, go back to normal life and 40,000 in the stadiums watching rugby, that's fantastic. It's just the US is very, very far from that, as you know.
Well, yeah, it's because of the federal system. It's difficult because most of what people expect to be implemented by a national government is not the purview of the national government in this country. So it's a little challenging when it comes to. So, for instance, I'm in Pennsylvania and I'm under lockdown, and the rules keep changing. But every business was shut down for a few months here. Now some businesses are open, and now you have to wear a mask. Now you don't wear a mask, and that's very different than next door in West Virginia, where they don't have those regulations. Of course, they have about 1/5 the population of the state. That might be one of the reasons why. But anyway, yeah. So that plays a role. So going forward. It's kind of really disappointing at so many levels. Not to downplay the pandemic, but the pandemic couldn't have come at a more opportune time to screw up the rapid growth of rugby in the U.S. That's my view. I think that we were once again, people talk about USA rugby in the USA is on the cusp. It's going to explode. We've been hearing this for 20, 30 years now. But I honestly think that rugby today in the U.S. was where soccer was when I was graduated high school, went to university for a year. Then I came in the Army in '83, and I went back to Maryland and stayed with my uncle. And when I stayed with my uncle, what happened was my cousin's like, "Hey, you want to go to the game today?" I'm like, "Yeah." So we went down, and I'm like, "What the hell is this? This isn't baseball." All the kids were playing soccer in 1983. And I'm like, nobody plays soccer. That's for Pele. Anyway, my point is that was when, on the East Coast of the United States and probably in California as well, but I wasn't out there at that stage, is when kids were really getting into playing the game and it started to take off and grow. And we've certainly got that way for the U.S. for rugby, but we also now have a professional league, and we've done well international competitions, the men and women's in the 15s, especially the women's in the 15s, but also in the sevens. And now is like the worst time this could happen, because if you watch the rugby in New Zealand, I've enjoyed it, but let's be honest, some of the games are really great, but there's also some really sloppy play going on because guys haven't been playing for a few months, and it shows because they didn't have the prep time. Can you imagine going a whole year and the impact on the ability and the capability of professional athletes to come back and compete? It's going to take a while. What are your thoughts about the prognosis of rugby in 2021 going forward?
Yeah, you bring up a good point about, not playing, the physical matches, the training, the contact, that sort of stuff. Look, we'd never been in a situation like this outside from an individual player or two being injured and having to recover and come back to play. And so it's something new, I think, that the world is experiencing outside of New Zealand. And so that is a very interesting point you bring up. We'll have to see what the effects are. I would hope that they're not too drastic. It doesn't set back the whole journey, the whole path of the US. It maybe just slightly stunts it, but then it gets back on track again. And so that'll be interesting. Honestly, I don't think there will be much rugby next year, unfortunately. And so then hopefully, things change after that. But if they do have a situation where maybe they're played behind closed doors and our broadcasters maybe fly in to call the games or call them remotely, we have that capability as well. Then at least then they're able to play and get going, So we'll have to see how that goes. But outside of rugby though, I suppose the big thing we do need to be aware of is that, there are so many people affected by this, whether they have family or themselves that are ill or passed away or are sick or maybe survived but are at reduced lung capacity and that sort of stuff. So that's all tricky. Work and everything else it's suffering. So a lot of remote jobs are still going on and stuff like that, which is great. But I think this is obviously a tough period for everybody. But it's good that people like yourself or myself can do things online and to give people something to listen to or something to talk about at least for a little while, for a moment in their day that they can have a smile or have a laugh. So you've got more steps on the Great Wall of China, Chris.
That's a good line. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. There's an impromptu line. Dallen didn't rehearse that one. I know that just came off the top of his head. More steps on the Great Wall of China. That's a good one. So listen, Dallen. Hey, look. Thanks a lot, man. Really appreciate it. It's I've had a lot of guests on here, but not that folks aren't friends or friendly, but I'd have to say you're probably like my first friend that's come on here. So thanks for being a mate and a friend for coming on, and thanks for sharing your stories, which are fascinating about your rugby origin story there. And it's really been great having you on here. You're the inaugural Rugby Ascendant segment live stream guest. And so we'll see who we get on here after this, but some folks are lined up to do it, and we'll get them on as soon as possible. But anyway, so I want to thank you so much for it. Really appreciate it. The load shedding has really put a damper on our crowd, but we've had some good folks in the chat sharing a lot of things here. What I want to say is thank you so much, and let me give you the chance to anything you want to say or anything you want to offer on the way out the door, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. It's great that you're featuring, some rugby folks as well on your platform, and very impressed how it's grown over the last few months as well. Final thoughts. I just say, I'm really excited to launch the Rugby Hive with a friend I actually played against on the Sevens World Series, Canadian international, Robin MacDowell. He's an international sevens coach these days. And, our thinking behind it was during this quiet time, it would be nice to chat to, legends that are either currently playing or have played rugby before at obviously international level or coached or coaching. And so we've got an array of brilliant folks that we chatted to. Frank Bunce will be one of them. We've obviously released Brian Abana, Nolly Waterman from England's on right now. So give it a listen. It's called the Rugby Hive on the social medias. And basically the premise is every legend has a story and we're here to share it.
Oh, there's another great line. Now that one you thought about, I'm sure, but that's a great line. Yeah. So people were like, what? It's over? No. Like a chat. No. They don't want us to end. So, but all good things must come to an end. The problem with my stream, Dallen, is I have to exercise discipline because I've had 4 hour and 20-minute streams. We're not going to do that today. That's not fair to you. Anyway, so I want to thank my guest, Dallen Stanford, for a fantastic appearance on the channel. Really enjoyed the chat. I know I'm going to go back and watch it, and if for no other reason, just see what was going on with my microphone there, because apparently there were problems. But anyway, so thank you so much, Dallen. I'll ask you to drop off the Zoom, and I'll go ahead and wrap up. I'll give you a call back shortly, okay?
Cheers, buddy. Thanks.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Dallen Stanford from the USA Sevens Rugby, as well as World Rugby, where he is a broadcaster, a commentator. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to this live stream. I realize folks suffering through load shedding in South Africa, and it's made it challenging to stay on. I appreciate those who went to the extra effort to switch over to their mobiles to watch the stream. Dallen's a fascinating character, lots of great stories, and I think he's a great first guest on the rugby segment of the Chris Wyatt Africa channel. So my sincere thanks to him. To all of you who've tuned in, please share this far and wide with friends, family, and foes. Anybody you don't like, tell them all about it. Let them tune in and watch the stream and see if they've enjoyed it. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not a subscriber to Chris Wyatt Africa and you found this interesting or intriguing, why don't you become a subscriber? It costs absolutely nothing. Just smash that subscription button right down there. And be sure to toggle the bell icon. The bell icon is important because it'll give you notifications. Well, in theory, YouTube isn't always successful, but in theory, you'll get notified anytime we have a live stream or a prepared video or a special feature like this with Dallen. I have a special feature tomorrow with Evans Larrabee, who's a small-scale commercial farmer in Ghana. He was on the program about 3 months ago, one of my first guests, and we're going to do updates of what's happening in farming in Ghana in the midst of the pandemic and some developments in his business. On Thursday, Joe Melia, the American comedian who lives in South Africa, American/South African comedian, will be on the channel once again. We'll be talking about cancel culture and what's been happening in his situation, his legal battle that's going on, along with a few other things. And no, we won't get Joe to tell any jokes. And then on Friday, Marabani, who's a South African living in the Netherlands doing postgraduate work, will be on the channel and be talking about some topics when it comes to political science and international events. Marabani is a recovering communist, a self-described communist who's no longer a communist, and like most people recovering from bad addictions like communism or cigarettes, they become the staunchest opponents against it. But anyway, so he'll be on the channel on Friday. Trying to get someone on Saturday, David Otto, the security specialist, and we'll talk about the Sahel and events in that region. That's the plan for Saturday, but hasn't been confirmed yet. Anyway, those events coming up here on the Chris Wyatt Africa channel, folks. Really enjoyed this stream. This has been one of those ones like when I was talking to Johan Eisel, Giselle's manager, I just could have talked forever. Dallen's got great stories. He knows everybody in the rugby world. Fascinating, really interesting character. And for me, the guy's got the best of both worlds, South Africa and America, right? So he can share an awful lot. One thing I didn't share with him on there is that he's talking about commentators and people like to have American voices on rugby. I don't know about that. When I listen to rugby broadcasts, I'd rather hear an Irish accent, a South African accent, or even an Australian accent. Not so much the American accent. But anyway, so thank you all so much. The Rugby Corner, thanks for having me. Oh, there's Dallen right there. You're welcome, Dallen. Thank you so much for being on. You were fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Really appreciate it. Who is RG? Oh, you guys are having fun over there. Ronaldo Jos is who they're talking about. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I will do a live stream later this afternoon, the Standard Stray Voltage, bring you up to date on news, events around the world. Also do a wrap-up discussion of what Dallen and I discussed today on this special feature, and take your questions. And I don't plan on taking calls, but who knows? Maybe I'll take calls this afternoon. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Wherever you're at, if you're dealing with load shedding, hang in there. If you're dealing with issues with the pandemic, hang in there. It's going to work out. And just we'll see you here later today on Stray Voltage on Chris Wyatt Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, your patronage, and for watching.